You ready for the most boomer answer you're going to get all night?
Yes. Hit me, dog.
Obedience is the first principle of heaven. And Gen Z and millennials have not been taught obedience well.
Welcome back to Midnight Mormons, guys. We are in studio today with Jim Bennett and Brad Witbeck, as well as Kwaku L. And you said something really interesting in the break, Jim, that I would like to flesh out a little bit here and now. You said, I think that the brethren are going through a transition right now that they aren't even aware of. And this was going to launch us into kind of a generational argument, a loyalty versus authenticity argument, so on and so forth. But could you please describe, I stopped you for the show so you could, explain yourself here. What did you mean by that? They're going through a transition they don't even necessarily understand or are aware of.
Well, I'm looking at my sons who are both serving missions. They were both called to Argentina. They were both called out as a result of COVID. One has gone back. I don't think the other one is going to. But they began their missions knocking on doors. And I just thought, that's what I was doing 30 years ago. And in the 21st century, the idea of knocking on doors to spread the gospel is really kind of ridiculous. And COVID has forced them to sort of move to social media and other kinds of ways to find people. But we find ourselves trying to figure out how to spread the gospel in the 21st century world, and we're using 20th and even 19th century methods to do it. And I think that the brethren, to some degree, aren't even aware of how essential it is to be able to change the method as to how we're spreading the gospel. And I don't think we've come up with the right answer. I think COVID is sort of forcing us to figure this out more quickly than we would have otherwise. But there are so many things that we do in the church that we do solely because it's the way it's always been done. You know, people knocking on doors to serve a mission is almost a hazing exercise. It's well, I had to do it, now you have to do it. Yeah. Well, great, but are people getting baptized? And the answer is no. The word I get, I serve my mission in Scotland. And because of social media, I'm able to keep in touch with a lot of people over there. And they tell me there are half as many active members in Scotland as there were when I was there 30 years ago.
So once again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I wholly validate and agree with 99% of what you said. One flag that came up in my mind is, okay, well, even if people aren't getting baptized, I don't think the baptism of others is necessarily the sole function of a mission as much as the deep and difficult spiritual journey that it is for the individual.
There's no question. So, and I think my sons are going through that journey, and I think it's been a valuable experience for them.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're looking at the church and you're looking at the growth of the church, which has slowed down considerably.
Yes.
I mean, we're growing in Africa. We're growing in developing nations. We are treading water in the United States. We are imploding all across Europe.
Yeah, and the gospel is not just for developing countries and the most faithful members of the elite in North America, This kind of ties into what I have also perceived as a generational gap in our faith that is nobody's fault. I actually think it's a very unique time in history where the general default to a seniority-based leadership model is not at all the best choice. In fact, to a certain extent, could be considered the worst and has no real historical precedent or doctrinal precedent ever. And I think a lot of that implosion would not have happened and will stop happening and even be reversed if we can get rid of that seniority-based leadership model. And even a lot of this show and the whole Mormon versus ex-Mormon arguments we're going with right now, people's hearts failing them and large amounts of inactivity, I think are a result of having stuck to that seniority-based leadership model when there was no reason to. Is this ringing true with you or no? Let me further this. A guy who was born in 1920 doesn't have that much of a difference of a life to his children maybe born in the 1930s, who don't really have that different of a life to those grandchildren born in the 1950s, who don't really have that different of a life to the great-grandchildren born in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
But the guy born in the mid-80s to mid-90s has a drastically different life than any of those before him, in a way that separates those of this brave new world from those of the old way of doing things in a crippling manner if you do not adjust. In a beautiful manner if you do. And I feel ex-Mormonism adjusted real fast. Anti-Mormonism adjusted real fast. But the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints didn't. And the internet has done to us, our heritage, our culture, and our people, what the Gutenberg press did to Europe, in my opinion. Okay? And the church blew up with this magic. I love Kwaku's quote previously, where he said, bring the magic back.
Right.
You study the early founding fathers of the faith, whatever you want to call them. Oh my gosh, you're 25? You're going to be freaking stake president. You're 72?
Right.
Oh, you're going to be stake president. It was about the fire in your belly, not this wisdom based upon merit, based upon age that we've settled into now. And from what I understand was a change in the 20s that they made because they wanted to avoid infighting and politicking amongst the 12. Okay.
Well, no, the seniority thing has had, Brigham Young was not considered president of the church for at least 5 years after Joseph Smith died. I mean, he was the president of the Quorum of the 12 and led the church as the president of the Quorum of the 12. And the idea that the president of the Quorum of the or the senior apostle assumes the presidency of the church didn't happen until well into the 20th century.
No. I mean, it was when they switched over because they wanted. I think it was at the time that they became the corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints instead of.
Well, John Taylor was the senior apostle who replaced Brigham Young when Brigham Young died.
So it's been there for a while.
It's been there.
In fact, it was part of the succession that really builds my testimony because
I thought it was there as tradition, but not as actual hard, fast policy.
They made the tradition starting then.
Yeah,
right.
We've never had a president of the church that's jumped the line.
Yeah, and
it's always been the senior apostle.
And
Brigham Young we've been doing this wrong from the beginning. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, from the beginning though, because after Joseph Smith died, the whole succession issue was huge. You had several people who were competing to say that they were the true successor to Joseph Smith.
Okay, I might have been incorrect. I'm sorry. I thought that was a little bit more modern than I had anticipated.
No, because you see it very clearly when you have Brigham Young having these guys who apostatized from the church coming back, and they go and they're like, oh, well, we were members of the 12. We're at this place in seniority. And he's like, nope, you apostatized. You go to the back of the line. John Taylor, you move up. And he hated John Taylor. They did not get along. But he had this dedication to this
Brigham
seniority
didn't get along
thing.
with a lot of people.
I was about to say, that happened a lot with Brigham Young. I mean, just like...
But you see that there, that instance gives you some real insight into this seniority thing, even from Brigham Young, the second prophet. It's been there the entire time.
Right.
Okay, interesting. See, I was always under the impression because of some reading that I had done that it was solidified and codified in a way that was kind of a little bit more modernly unique of the past 100 years.
Well, it still hasn't been codified scripturally anyway. I mean, it's
well, that's
still,
what I'm saying. Like, I don't see a scriptural basis in it.
I think I've heard it talked about as an inspired process, but I don't know that I've necessarily...
Okay, well, either way, the reason why I say that I think it's hurting us now is demonstrated by very interesting research that all the major polling organizations have gone into and social scientists have studied, that all these different generations that are alive now, everything from the silent generation to the greatest generation to, boomers, Gen Xers, Zoomers like Kwaku and Brad, and millennials like me, they've been asked to do all kinds of multiple reaction studies where they've said, okay, what qualities are most important to you? How do you describe yourself? What do you look for in a partner? What do you look for in a boss or a subordinate, so on and so forth. And some really interesting self-identifiers have arisen. And these were the ones when I was reading these materials that really stuck out to me. That boomers, one of their highest demands is loyalty. And they have the most brand loyalty when purchasing. They have the most, desire for loyalty from romantic partners, from friendships. They perceive criticisms as kind of like an infringement upon that loyalty, so on and so forth. Okay. But there's also the other double-edged sword. They perceive themselves as the most loyal. I remember Gen Xers, it was kind of funny. They were the most cynical, which I guess is why they like Bill Maher so much. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? But the other thing that I found was interesting is they drank the most. Apparently Gen Xers consumed more alcohol than other generations. Zoomers are like the most sober of like the past 100 years that we've had in America. And that millennials, which are probably some of the biggest to leave the church as of late, one of the biggest things that they valued, whether it's in cinema, whether it's in social media, whether it's in personal interactions with friends or even authorities, what they valued most was authenticity.
Right.
So we've got this disconnect where it's like there's an older generation that values more than anything this loyalty. And if you hear something, don't read it. That's anti-Mormon material. You know what I'm saying? And just pray about it. You'll be fine. Or like, if they ask you to jump, you're supposed to ask how high.
Right.
That is administering a faith. And we've kept these people alive and in power for who knows how long. You know what I'm saying? And this mindset is now lording over people that crave an authenticity and I think would do well with receiving it. And in many ways, whether it's in the gospel topics essays, which you can talk about later, or whether it's in the example of this book that you have, you know what I'm saying, in your family library or whatever, or the manuscript you got or whatever you were describing, the letter you received, I can't remember, the primary source that you have. I feel that this loyalty versus authenticity dichotomy.
Well, do you want me to describe that?
Yeah, sure, go for it. Just first off, where do I go wrong? Do I go wrong? And if I do, fix it.
Well, I don't think you're going wrong. I do think that the brethren and the people who are prize loyalty above all else are doing so with the best of intentions. I mean,
yes.
And this is why I think this has been kind of wrenching, not just for the church institutionally. It's really bizarre to me that a church that is founded on the principle of continuing revelation is also so ardently opposed to the idea of constant churning change. We want everything to stay exactly the same, and yet we're built on the rock of revelation, the idea that God has many great and important things to reveal.
And the proof of that, if I may interject, is literally our hymn book. I mean, we have a faith that venerates musicianship and art, the arts, like the fine arts with a big A,
yep,
in almost a codified manner more than any other faith that I'm really aware of. And we revere personal revelation as the way that you will know the Book of Mormon is true and is the bedrock of our faith. But when it comes to music, the heavens were closed in 1985 when the last approved hymn book came out.
Well, there's a new one coming out. I've submitted 14 different songs.
40 years later.
I don't know that any of my songs will make it in.
Yeah, but to me, that's like if we really believed, and I'm not saying we don't believe, but if we really put into practice the belief of that butter churn of personal revelation, our hymn book wouldn't be 35 years old.
Well, there's no reason to even have a hymn book. Why can't we all have the hymns online and pick from thousands of different hymns rather than
you're
just...
a spiritual libertarian. No,
yes, I think I am. I'm looking over at Brad and Kwaku, and I think I've been talking too much. I'm wondering if you guys have any
jump
input
in,
here.
man. Jump in. Where do we go wrong, guys?
Well, I think like as the most Zoomer here, the lack of authenticity is getting worsened and worsened because the same people who are trying to fix it are the same people who caused it. And they're putting gasoline on a fire. So one example of trying to get the youth more interested and jump over the wall of us calling out fakeness or boredom is one, the horrible, my opinion, the absolutely dreadful mismanagement of church social media. So we went from Mormon and at LDS Church on Twitter to at Church of Jesus Christ. All right, great handle. We got the handle Church of Jesus Christ. We probably had to pay for it. And then We took it away and we made it @ch_Jesus Christ.
What?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the Twitter handle of
Really?
the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
One of the stupidest decisions I have ever heard of. And then on Instagram, LDS Youth. Great. Everyone, when my age, when I was investigating the church, I typed in LDS on Instagram and found LDS Youth. And I said, oh, guess what? That's the one I'm going to follow. That's relevant to me. Do you know what it is now? Strive to be. Strive to be what?
What?
Well, and that has absolutely no connection to the church, to somebody who doesn't know that it has
Yeah.
a connection to the
It's-
church.
No, it is. They saw that people. I see a lot of underscores online. Should we put an underscore in the church's net? No, that's what you.
Yeah,
you
not
get-
if you can get the reason you don't need the underscore. You know
Right.
what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Right.
And then so you had all these tweets from years and years and years from the website's beginning. Now just who cares? Because they. By the way. They didn't even change the @ You can change the @ on the profile and keep everything. They made new profiles. So now we have less and less followers on our main church's social media when we're losing a lot of members, which should be the opposite. We're losing members. More on social media, get a bigger following. It's like, how have you consistently made some of the worst choices? Like, go get a 15-year-old girl who's an influencer in Draper,
Well, and it
Utah.
breaks my heart though, because the content that they make that can go out, these Book of Mormon videos, these Bible videos I have sent to some of my evangelical friends and
beautiful.
Protestant friends. They are beautiful. They've been in tears. They've said thank you. And I look at them, there's 50,000 views on the YouTube channel for this video that I know they dumped $250,000 into. And I'm like, it's the distribution model that's bad. Like, how is this failing? And I started a stake media group on my stake, and then I ended up flopping, not going anywhere, because it just does not compute in these people whose formative years were out of there. And this doesn't mean that they're all this way, but there's something going on in which this new battlefield is not getting dealt with. And Kwaku, you told me an interesting story that I'd like, if you feel comfortable sharing it again. You can just tell me if not, and I can talk about something else. But I remember you said that you'd met with one of the church leaders, that they'd watched one of your old, I don't know if it was Saints Unscripted or it was one of your videos that you'd said, but where they said, like, I don't know why this is working, but I recognize that it's working.
It was on a certain church talk show, the first church talk show I was ever on. One of the people in charge of the organization that produced it was meeting with the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And one of the apostles, he was showing him the show, and he was saying, we were getting a lot of people who are watching the show and getting baptized because of it. They're sending us emails, they're writing comments and messaging us saying, this has helped me join the church. And he watched it, and it's us going, we're Mormons, cola. Here's a meme, just being the like juvenile dumb, right?
Yeah.
And this apostle said, I don't understand how this is working.
But it's working.
But it's working. And if they're getting baptized, all right, keep going. But I don't get how this works.
Well,
and then he said to the apostle, with all due respect, elder, the fact that you don't get it is why it works.
Right.
Well, then, and also, didn't you say there was another church authority that had leaned back and looked at it and said, I think when a lot of people in this building have died or gone away,
have been honorably released from this life, we will have better church media.
Oh, that is savage, but very true. And it's made me reevaluate. Who was that, by the way? I want names. Names? You're not giving names?
Are you am I on camera right now?
No. You can take it off. Okay, good. See, I had suspected that earlier, and you were off camera, I do believe. We'll double check that.
I could tell what he was saying.
Okay, rock
I can
on.
see it from here.
So I look at that though, and it's made me reevaluate the story of the Stripling Warriors, because we all know that there's the famous story that the anti-Nephi Lehites were so committed to the loyalty to their cause of nonviolence that they buried their weapons, and even if the Lamanites were going to come out of the hills and slaughter them, they would kneel before their oppressors, and they got their heads cut off and smote and everything. And could you imagine being a Stripling Warrior watching that happen to your parents, and then knowing that a new battle is coming, and these old boomers are so committed to this that they will, my grandmother will kneel before my enemies and let her head get lopped off before she fights them. I used to think these were young men who were timid, but had got over their timidness and said, no, my mom has taught me that I can fight if I believe in God. And I viewed them as this kind of juvenile thing. But now I think there's almost this, I could see a young man saying, no, Dad, I will not let you go out there and I will not let you get slaughtered. But you need to get out of my way so I can go defend you because I did not make this promise. Mm-hmm. This is a promise you made, but this is not a promise I made. And if I have to yank you aside and tie you to this chair in the living room, you know what I'm saying? Like I will go and I will defend because my mother taught me the principles of the gospel.
Okay.
And I kind of feel a little bit like, I don't know how to do this. I'm not going to yank Dallin H. Oaks, you know what I'm saying, out of his chair and say, yo, let me podcast, dog. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to do that. But there's part of me that wants to be like, you have to listen to this. I sustain you. You've probably seen God. You have probably fought temptation in a way I could only dream of. You've probably reached.
Now, see, I'd push back on that. I don't think that the apostles or prophets are any better than we are. I don't think they're any worse. But I think they experience God the same way we do. Yeah. I think the idea that I think there is a huge number of people in the church, and maybe this is a tangent to the topic here.
Okay.
But there are a huge number of people in the church who think that every Thursday when the apostles meet together, that there's an extra chair where Jesus comes and sits and runs the meeting sometimes, and maybe he chooses the hymn every once in a while. And, I think that's absolute nonsense. Uh-huh. I think the purpose of mortality for every member of the church, including prophets and apostles, is to come to earth and walk by faith and make mistakes and make decisions. And I think that the idea that these guys have some kind. I remember I was in a gospel doctrine class, and my wife was teaching actually, and we were talking about the priesthood ban, and somebody suggested it was a mistake. And a leader in the ward said, you all need to understand that these men are operating on a spiritual plane beyond what we can probably even understand.
Yeah, that's a little excessive.
And my response was, I think there are 15 people, men and women, in this room who are as righteous as the 15 people who sit in the highest offices of the church. And I think that there are 15 people in this room who could fill those offices. I mean, it's not that they're called because they are better than us. Mm-hmm. They're called because they are given a responsibility and they are charged with that responsibility. But each of us has that. I mean, so this I think can help sort of assuage the difficulty that we have with loyalty versus authenticity, because we say, okay, well, these guys must know something I don't. These guys must be connected in some way I'm not. What if we were all to say, all of us can lift where we stand. Yeah. All of us have the ability to accomplish miraculous things, and all of us have the ability to access God in exactly the same way as every single person.
But we don't all have the ability to access the church's Twitter feed. You know what I'm saying?
No, that's true. That's true. And so that's a challenge. But the idea, when you start talking about the idea like, oh, these guys, they must get it because they've all seen God. First of all, I don't think that's true.
Well, yeah, and I didn't mean to overly lionize these people, because also I don't think seeing God is a requirement to being prophet. There was 400 years of no prophet between the last prophet of the Old Testament and John the Baptist coming out, followed 10 years later by the Savior himself. You know,
right?
So I reject this idea. I am very much an anti-elitist, and where I was going in my sentence wasn't necessary to lionize these guys so much as just simply say, me challenging your action in this arena does not come from a place of anything but the same love I have for my grandparents, the same love I have for my church.
It comes from a place of love.
It comes from a place of nothing but respect for everything you've done. But Dad, you got to sit this one out. You know what I'm saying?
That, I think, is the important thing. You look at the Stripling Warriors, and they weren't going out there. They're saying, hey, look, we do not doubt our mothers knew it. They weren't saying, our parents are idiots, you know.
Yes.
They're not
Yeah.
going out there
Right.
saying they're the worst.
You know?
Let's go
Right.
fight this war.
Yeah.
And that's the attitude I think we need to be careful of. We can't just go out and be like,
Yeah.
oh, these boomers ruined the church.
Because they perceive it as a lack of loyalty, and it's like, no, that's not it.
And the thing
it's
that
actually
I think,
out of loyalty I say this.
and we need to have the gratitude for them raising us well enough to know what steps we should be trying to take anyway, right?
So how do we thread this needle? I mean, Jim, like, you're awesome. I got mad respect here. I straight up called you a detached boomer who was getting used by anti-Mormons as a prop for their podcast.
Right.
And then you agreed to come on my show. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's amazing and takes a certain amount of, emotional intelligence.
No, it doesn't. It just takes somebody who doesn't like being called a boomer. That's all. But
Set that record
no,
straight.
so I got to tell this story.
So how do we thread this needle, though? Like, what do we do? Like, guide us in this way.
Members of my family have tried to thread this needle.
Okay.
I have an ex-cousin-in-law because she's divorced from my cousin, but she was and she's no longer active in the church. But she was an advertising executive who came up with the whole "I'm a Mormon" campaign. It was her agency, and she was and one of the things she did is she sat down with the 12 and she showed them the episode of South Park. Are you familiar? Joseph Smith was called a prophet. Dum 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 dum. You seen that one?
Okay, rock on. I think I've seen clips of it. It's been so long.
There's some amazing stuff in there, but it's just devastating and just mocks the church. You know, Moroni appears and he says, "I am a Native American," and Joseph Smith says, "But you're white." "Yes, all Native Americans were white until we were cursed." You know, all this kind of stuff. And she did that. She said, "You need to watch this, because you all need to know that this is how the world sees us. You need to see that, and you need to know that this is how the world sees us." And so at the time, the 12 watched an episode of South Park. And
I would have died to be a fly on that wall.
I would too. and the Meet the Mormons campaign came out of that, and I think that was wildly successful. And then now we've sort of backtracked, and now Mormon is a victory for Satan and everything else. But I don't want to dive too hard into that.
Okay.
And because I sustain Russell Nelson, I disagree with him, but I sustain him enough to try to say Latter-day Saint and try to frame
I
that,
do my best as well.
frame that in the way he wants us to. But
I do actually think there's some deep significance to that we'll only realize down the line. But I was talking with a buddy of mine about how he literally realized he left the Mormon church because
it's not the Mormon church.
It's not.
Yeah.
We are the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we ought to act that way. I actually view this as an opportunity for us to do some of the things that we are talking about here and now.
Yeah.
To make this step forward to actually be the restored church of Jesus Christ. We're not Mormon. We're not the traditions that have been handed down with Mormonism, right?
Well, the problem with that, though, I mean, the problem with Mormon is not Mormon church. The problem is there is no synonym for Mormonism.
That's not a mouthful. Yeah, you can't say Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints ism.
Or, the theology of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Or
the restored gospel. Just claim it.
Well, the problem with the restored gospel is that when we expect people outside of the church to refer to us that way, it's like asking non-Catholics to refer to the church as the one holy and apostolic faith. I mean, you're making a faith claim in that message.
That's kind of cool, though. I think I would.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't think
I agree with both of you though, because I don't believe that. I don't believe Jehovah's Witnesses are the true witnesses of Jehovah,
right?
But I call them Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah,
I'm not going to be like, listen, likers of Jehovah-ish with your Bible, kind of right. I'm not going to call them that. I'll be like, okay, you're Jehovah's Witnesses. You love the Lord, and this is and so. But then also though, the reality is, and this is coming from someone who is in the marketing world, everyone knows us as Mormons.
Yeah,
we go, okay, well, we emphasize Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it's changed a lot. To the outside world, it's changed a lot to a couple of journalists who had to cover our general conference because they did a bad job on their last article, and their boss said, you don't get the cool story, go cover the Mormons in SLC, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then we were like, wow, this one nobody from AP called us the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Isn't that a win? It's not a win. It's not a win. The regular world knows us as Mormon, and all we've been doing is really missing the SEO online. while the enemies of the church use the term Mormon that everyone else is searching.
Yeah, ad nauseum.
And then we're like, well, aren't we doing I mean, I'm not here to disagree with the prophet, because it's sort of like when people say, oh yeah, the president's such an idiot. Well, the president knows who killed Kennedy. The president knows if there are aliens or not. He is operating with a lot of context you and I don't get to know.
Yeah.
And the prophet as well is operating in context of a lot of decisions that we just don't know about, okay? So we have to keep that in mind. But also there's a reason why I've started in my life calling Joseph Smith the prophet and calling Russell M. Nelson a prophet.
The distinction between the two, yeah.
So you're like Heber J. Grant, David O. McKay. You're saying that
a living prophet's more important than a dead prophet. I'm sorry, Harold B. Lee is not as important as Joseph Smith Jr., and you will never get me to believe that he was.
That's interesting.
You never will.
Interesting. Okay.
One is a prophet of the dispensation and was the equivalent of an archangel in the life before, and the other was Harold B. Lee. You know what I mean? It's like, all right.
He's got a library.
Well, Harold B. Lee had a conversation with my father.
Your family know everybody.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Well, I always told, when I was running for office, I always told the story that the first politician in my family was not my father or my grandfather. It was a man by the name of Daniel H. Wells. You familiar with Daniel H. Wells? He's third mayor of Salt Lake City. He was
interesting.
He was a lawyer for Joseph Smith. Daniel H. Wells was kind of a big deal. But he was also a practicing lawyer in the time of Abraham Lincoln in Illinois. And met Abraham Lincoln. And the story goes, and I began every single campaign appearance with this story. The story goes that Daniel H. Wells walked up to Abraham Lincoln and said, "You, sir, are a marked man, for I swore to myself if I ever met a man who was uglier than I was, I would shoot him on sight." To which
you can't say that now without the Secret Service taking issue.
Well, you stepped on the punchline because Abraham Lincoln replied, "Shoot away. If I'm uglier than you, I don't want to live." And I was told that story by my uncle, who says I look an awful lot like Daniel H. Wells, which is true. I do. So it's all good.
That's rough.
But my uncle, who told me that story, also left the church. He had been writing.
Dude, they're dropping like flies, man. Become friends with Bennett. You leave the church.
This is I think before I was born.
Oh, okay.
But shortly thereafter, and he's no longer with us. But he was writing priesthood manuals for the church, and he would give them to Richard L. Evans, and Richard L. Evans would say, "This is the most brilliant thing I've ever seen." And then he'd take it to Harold B. Lee, and Harold B. Lee says, "No, change this, change this, change this." And my uncle was just frustrated with the fact that What is this disagreement in the Quorum of the 12? And I thought these men were supposed to be inspired, and who does Harold B. Lee think he is? And blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Anyway, I ended up leaving the church. And my father found himself sitting in the Hotel Utah, which is now the Joseph Smith Memorial Building, with Harold B. Lee. I have no idea what the occasion was, and this was long before he was a senator. But Harold B. Lee asked him, what happened with your brother? And my father explained all of this, and he said Harold B. Lee got visibly angry. And he said, "Oh, for heaven's sakes, I can understand people outside the U.S. putting us on this kind of pedestal, but doesn't your brother realize we're just men? And we're doing the best we can."
Uh-huh.
But Harold B. Lee was very much, I'm a man. And I'm doing the best I can.
That is actually why I feel our current Latter-day Prophets, like Russell M. Nelson, I feel is still the prophet in the same way. Because I don't want to put Joseph Smith up on that pedestal either.
Well, when you do that, it's pretty easy to knock anybody off of a pedestal.
Exactly.
No matter who they are.
And I think that when we put people onto a pedestal and kind of have this higher expectation of them than we should have of any man, it puts us in a fragile position because now we're starting to put our faith in them almost a little bit more than we are in Jesus Christ.
The floor recognizes Kwaku L with a rebuttal to B.D. Witbeck. No,
but you kind of have to though, because our faith should be rooted in God, okay, and channeled through the Spirit. But if we're being honest, there is a level in which we have to say we do have faith in Joseph Smith. We do have faith in the fact that he saw God and saw Jesus, that the revelations he gave us were real, that these things, that the church he restored is true.
Yeah.
There is a level of I mean, when as a
convert, I don't think
I'm
you would say
that
I don't think you mean we have faith in Joseph Smith, because that would be an assumption of deity. You say we have faith
not necessarily.
that Joseph. Yes.
Yes. If you do not, there is no way Joseph Smith is not deified at this moment with Adam and Abraham and Enoch and Noah. 100%. I'm one of those. I know I'm one of the kooky ones.
I'm with you on that. I agree with you on that, actually. I think that is his end. That's where he's at. But the important thing that we have to not lose sight of is that we have a living church on earth today that we need to be working with.
No, I agree. Yeah, I'm
that hierarchical.
I'm not a snufferite. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, but I mean, Joseph Smith's end is all of our end. I mean, all of us are going to get there too. I think that the number of people that have gotten there, would blow our minds. That C.S. Lewis used to talk about if you were to see people. I mean, C.S. Lewis was clearly not a Latter-day Saint, but he said if you were to see people after these are beings that you would be tempted to worship.
Yeah. Just seeing the eternal potential in everyone around you.
Right.
Yeah, they were all, quote, didn't he say, quote, gods in embryo?
I don't know if he used that phrase, but his theology.
We're going to look right now.
I know exactly what you're talking about. It's a great quote.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to go back a little bit to the authenticity thing. So, like, my shirt says young and dumb. Right, that's the company I run, and
it says young and blue.
It's
which is even more accurate for some reason.
Took out some of the letters because it's less to text, right?
Yeah, it's Hebrew without vowels. So, there you go.
But we do events and media and concerts and all that stuff, and the audience right now it's almost all LDS college aged people, and some of the fire I've gone under from both active members and ex members. It's just really interesting. Some of the photos and videos that come out of those events, those young and dumb parties, Kwaku, because the girls are wearing just not wearing. I mean, their shorts are a bit short, and they have these crop tops, and you can see, and I'm like, so, and they're like, are they all ex-Mormons? No, they all, almost all of them believe. Well, I mean, it just seems strange. It seems strange to you because you are incredibly detached. And in your mind, the idea that a girl can be an active, believing member of the church with a great testimony and still want to wear it in style, and it doesn't conflict. And in their minds, it's impossible not to conflict. And then their heads, they're going, okay, well, maybe you just have a bunch of very liberal. I wager most of the people who buy tickets to my events voted for Trump or didn't vote or was like, yeah, Trump's okay because we're in Utah County, right? So there's this disconnect of they completely do not understand, not all, but many people in church leadership. And when I say church leadership, I mean the bureaucrats in the church office building.
Yeah, more middle management than
some of the people appointed to some of these, I will even say stake presidencies. They're like, I don't understand how they're partying like this. I just went to cultural hall dances when I was younger. And if that's the expectation you have on the youth, take that. And then also take the fact that young people are leaving a lot and see that they're connected, because that's been my biggest thing, trying to get them to just like see how these two things are, and to them it's like the same size of a magnet. They're like, no, there's no way it's connected. Like, I promise you.
And it's not just trying to normalize moral decay, because I think it's fair if elders have, a certain desire for what they see has worked and they want to bestow their wisdom upon the young people. But at the same token, you need to at some point trust that this wisdom and these values that are eternal, okay, where that line is on the skirt will vary from culture to culture, country to country, century to century, of what's considered modest and immodest. And if we are making you think that it's the length of the skirt and not the personal modesty, the fundamental modesty of your soul and your spirit inside, you've gotten lost in the weeds that the Sadducees were lost in and are committing the exact same error that Jesus Christ called out when he said, you make these white sepulchers, all right?
Yeah.
But you're just dead bones inside, okay?
And that, I think, is the core thing. We need to watch that we are not putting hedges around the law and making those our new measurement. Because then we are adding to what Christ said. We are straying away from teaching people true principles and letting them govern themselves.
Yeah, and it's creating a bureaucratic state that a bureaucratic faith that to a certain extent, I feel is robbing many of that localized leadership of the culture of it, is robbing them of the ability to solicit direct guidance on behalf of their stewardship for the Spirit. So, like, we're in this situation where I feel it is unique.
My question, though, with it is, how do we sustain our priesthood leaders who have maybe slightly different values than where we're at?
I wouldn't say values. I would say interpretation of the proper execution of those values.
Yeah.
Okay. And it is that loyalty versus authenticity dichotomy.
Yeah.
Where we crave the authenticity of finding out that David O. McKay disagreed with John Taylor on X, Y, or Z thing. We crave that authenticity of, even while in a position of leadership with heightened access to the Spirit, I messed up on this thing and I had to repent of it. And if you're ever in a leadership position, don't do this thing incorrectly and learn as I learned, See, that's not a breaking for us and my generation, at least. We crave that understanding because then it gives us hope that in our fallen state, we can ultimately effectively lead as well as you did. So, So you're the eldest in this group. Kwaku's the youngest. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
oh, he's going to marry my daughter too. So.
Yeah, that's true. They keep matching up on mutual, man. We gotta.
I'm fairly certain that will not happen.
As am I, and as is Eliza.
Oh, that's hilarious. So. But either way, all jokes aside, what I view this, we already got rid of the biggest problem, I thought, in our faith when they finally got rid of the temple marriage the same day that you get civically engaged.
Yes, that was a huge step.
That was I agree. Barking that to the treetops for decades in my faith as what I viewed as the single most destructive cultural expectation we put upon our youth. Okay. So when that was gone, I was like, oh, dude, Russell M., like, you're forever in my book. Like, boom, boom shagalaka. When you can make church 1 hour, then you're also going to be in my book. You know what I'm saying? But anyway,
he already got you to 2.
Yeah, he already got you to 2, exactly. But
which is the wrong way for us to be thinking about it.
Yeah, which is the wrong way of thinking about it. But so like when when that changed, I was like, okay, good. Like I have been waiting faithfully for this for so long. I wonder how can we, as the younger faithful members that love the 12, we love those that serve in our faith, how can we get over this loyalty versus authenticity dichotomy and get the grandparents away so we can fight like the Stripling Warriors fought, because they are getting their heads lopped off?
Well,
go ahead. I think what's the biggest thing missing from this conversation is the reality that respect is earned. And you've got a lot of people, young people, early 20s and teens, who do not respect their stake presidents or their bishops or even some apostles. Because in their eyes, it's just, it's the same kind of personality down to the general conference voice that they've always seen. And they go, okay, whatever, I don't care.
Which gets made fun of in memes.
I mean, there's a reason those LDS meme pages are so big.
You mean
because
brothers and sisters? I'm so excited to be here.
And in your head, you go, great, and boom, shredded the cookie cutter. Like, boom, there it is. I don't care. And there's a lack of respect. There's one story, I'll keep names out, but it's a gentleman who was not that active, believed, probably did some things he shouldn't do. He's talking with the bishop. Bishop is saying, okay, well, you're going to have to turn in your temple recommend if you keep this up. And he says, I'm going to be honest, I'm probably going to keep it up. He says, well, you're going to be in jeopardy and you're standing in church. He says, who says I'm going to come talk to you again? He says, you have to. And he says,
like, no,
says, what are you going to do about it? And in that moment, that's when the bishop realized this guy he doesn't respect me.
That had to have been in Utah. That was in Utah, right?
Yes.
Because that exact same thing happened to my stake president, and I'll tell you a counter story when you finish.
Okay. Well, bishop realized the guy doesn't respect me. Realize it's a YSA ward of like 250 people. I've never really developed a relationship or friendship with this person, so why would he? Third, I've spoken to him maybe 4 times now. So he's coming, this bishop is expecting this guy to come with this life-changing, movement. And the kid's like, I don't even know you and I don't care. But when the bishop was younger, it's okay, I understand this priesthood authority and I will, with my whole life, and I will go with it. And now it's totally different. And so there's an expectation that's been put upon Gen Z where Gen Z is like, yeah, no, I do not care what you have to say unless you've given me a reason to. Because remember, we're still the divorced parents generation. We're still like our whole generation is all about you're shady. And I don't know about
it's
you.
made
until
Gen
you give
Z
me
a lot
reason
more
to.
conservative,
There-
but it's
there's
a
one thing-
heightened.
I want to say, I can't imagine treating my bishop like that.
Yeah,
I
neither
hear
can
that,
I.
and
I
I
can't
think
either.
I think, holy crap.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, if that kid is gonna go off and do his own thing, that's up to him. But that level of like disrespect and lack of gratitude for any help that is being given by
That
this guy.
kid was Kwaku, and he was euphemizing the story just to cover his identity. No, I'm
Oh,
just
great!
kidding.
Then he gets to hear it.
Asking for a friend.
I've had pretty amazing bishops. You guys heard earlier.
Me too. But I think that's hard for me because I think that goes beyond the pale of just a generational difference, and that's a huge lack of respect. Because I do agree with you that respect needs to be earned to a certain degree, and I think relationships ought to be built. But that's just rude.
Just bad.
And just bad. And maybe there's paraphrasing happening from the story that makes it sound different than what actually happened.
No, I agree that it's a very mean thing to say to someone, right? But when you examine it, it's also the fact that
it shows it was a paradigm shift in leadership.
this is someone who is he's trying to figure out what he believes in and what his life is, and he finds himself being like, he's being inquisited by someone he doesn't even know and expecting he feels this person just expects him to cough up the secret details of his life.
Right.
And the reality is, if for the most part, you're going to be like if you don't have respect for the priesthood authority there, it is just some guy in an office who's being a little nosy, and you're like, well, I'm not going to tell you that, right? So I do also try to take it from that perspective of And then one of my exes, it's a very similar thing. She had sex with her ex-boyfriends, had been super righteous, and wanted to go to the temple, get her temple recommend back, and it had been like a year and a half. And she's like, Kwaku, I feel like the bishop doesn't care about my progress. He just wants me to say the key words that will make him give the thumbs up.
Yeah, but that couldn't also be chalked up to just a failing in this volunteer.
No, exactly.
Lay clergyman who's doing the best.
No,
the best
I 100%
that he
agree,
can,
because it's an unpaid, very hard position. But I told her, I said, "Do you believe you're forgiven?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Then tell him that, and tell him you ask him, do you think you're getting in the way of me in my testimony getting stronger?" And then he gives her the temple recommend back, because there was a level of confidence she needed to have and a little bit of pushback.
Yeah.
And
so who knows? Maybe I ended up being good for her in a backdoor kind of way, or what?
Well, now she's sealed in the temple and very happy, right?
Great.
So there's not really a one size fits all. I think the question you're asking is, how do we fix this? I'm not sure if there's a one way to do it.
Well, I think a cultural shift would really help.
Well, it goes back to where you started here with the idea of the fact that we're in a transition that the brethren don't even realize they're in.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of an exchange would not have happened in my generation when I was your age. When I was your age, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And it's happening now. And whether we like the fact that it's happening now, we have to deal with the fact that it's happening now. And I think that's something we're coming to painfully in fits and starts.
Yeah.
But we have to do it.
And it makes me think.
Well, okay. Were you going to continue on that? Sorry. Was there anything specifically you were going to say? Because I'm still going back to, what do we do? Like, we can talk ad nauseum. You got an answer? I do. Okay, Brad, hit
Brad
me.
has the answer.
You ready for the most boomer answer you're going to get all night?
Yes. Hit me, dog.
Obedience is the first principle of heaven. And Gen Z and millennials have not been taught obedience well. I think there are failings in the parenting of so many of these people that they just do not value obedience the way they ought to. And here we are now, and we have to figure out what to do with it. I think there needs to be a lot of humility on the side of Gen Z people and on the side of the leadership, and that the people on the side of Gen Z need to recognize, where am I not being obedient? And look at that and figure out, where am I not following what God would have me do, right? And on the other side, people on the other end who value obedience already need to be more careful with charity. They need to see what they can do to be authentic, build authentic relationships with the people who are struggling with obedience, and try to bridge that gap that is so incredibly large right now because no one has done anything good about it because no one will talk about it, and it's just kind of festered, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is what I think it is. The younger side needs to be more obedient, and the older side needs to be more charitable. And I feel like it's pretty black and white to me. That seems like, because there are so many ways to apply that.
This is why you're straight up apostle material, dog. You just called out your generation for lack of obedience.
He's not apostle material. He's got a beard.
I am
that's
apostate.
But
See?
the eyebrows.
I see that you had the gears working when he was saying that. I sensed
Yeah,
some
yeah.
Oh, I had
opposition.
some. Well, I took that not really harshly, but a little bit of an indictment. Is I'm the only person in this room who is the parent of people from Gen Z. And you said this is a problem with the parenting.
No, but this is present company excluded, bro. You're so cool that you're
I'm
freaking,
so cool.
And
Dog,
I don't
I
think,
couldn't be more cool.
and I don't
No,
think that it's
I do.
universal.
We have a lot of respect for you in this regard, and that's why we
I'm
Well, I
speaking in
appreciate
general
that.
terms.
But what I'm saying, before I became a parent, I kind of thought that I get the chance to mold and shape these young minds and these young souls. And the thing that I discovered with my 5 children is that they came fully formed.
Yeah.
They came who they are. I mean, you're a father and you've got a young child, but you can see they are who they are, right? And so the idea of, well, you just need to be more obedient. I've got 2 sons on missions, and they are obedient and they are wonderful missionaries. But the thing that I've discovered in how they are wired as individuals is, okay, you want me to be obedient? Great. Why do I need to be obedient to something that doesn't make a lick of sense? And there are so many, like when I was a missionary, when I was your age, when I was a missionary, we had a number of rules that weren't in the handbook. One of them was you cannot have the Spirit with you if you are standing up in a suit and your suit coat is unbuttoned. Literally.
Are you kidding?
Not kidding you. And then that was with my first mission president. And then he was actually called as a general authority.
I got a picture of Brigham Young I'm going to throw up on the screen.
There you go. Brigham. So he was called as a general authority and left his mission early. And that's when Joseph Fielding McConkie came out. And Joseph Fielding McConkie stood up at our first zone conference and just very purposely unbuttoned his suit coat and let his suit open. And there was an audible gasp for the missionaries. Just, what is he doing? And he said, and another rule was, if it's warm, you can take your coat off, but only if you get permission from your zone leader. And when that first was instituted, the zone leaders went, we give you permission if you want to take your coat off. And the mission president said, nope, you have to call your zone leader. And if you can't get a hold of your zone leader, you have to call the mission home.
Yeah.
And then President McConkie stood up at that first zone conference and said, we received 5 different phone calls today from missionaries wondering whether or not they can take their coat off. Heavens, you're old enough to hold the Melchizedek priesthood. You're old enough to know whether or not you can take your coat off.
Yeah.
Hey,
Right?
here's Brigham Young right there.
There he is.
Check out that
With his
coat,
suit-
baby.
But he had a vest. We weren't wearing vests. But he does have a bow tie.
So I agree with you completely. And I understand the view that, okay, obedience can be taken too far, but I think it's when you get into the weeds of what we were talking about earlier, when you make obedience measured against the hedges around the law you've built.
But
right?
so many of the things that we ask people to do are hedges around the law.
But I think obedience ought to be measured by the gospel. The obedience that we need to be focused on is, am I communing with my Father in heaven? Am I repenting? Am I reading my scriptures and doing what I can to come closer to being like Jesus Christ? And if you are focused on those things, there's not a lot that can go wrong. If you love God and love your neighbor, everything else hangs on that. And if you are obedient to those principles only, you'll get rid of the majority of problems that we're seeing.
So how angry do I get at my daughters when they come to me and say they want to pierce their ears more than once?
Oh, I can't even believe this is a conversation.
When Gordon B.
Anyway,
Hinckley says you should only have a single piercing and made a huge deal about it. And my daughters are like, that's kind of crap, and I'm going to pierce my ears 3 times, very tastefully. And my reaction as a parent of Gen Z is, you know what? I don't see anything in that gets in the way of you feeling the Spirit. That to me is very much like a button suit coat on your mission. Pierce your ears 3 times, go nuts. Am I encouraging disobedience? Or am I trying to sort of dig out the hedges around the law?
Here's the deal. You as the father That's your call.
No,
I don't think that it's my
their
call to make.
Because well, my daughters now are both 24 and 22 years old.
But what you do as a father is your call, right?
Well, that's right. But I think I'm a more effective father if I don't pick a fight over earrings. Mm-hmm. And I focus on whether or not my children are living the two great commandments upon which hang all the law and the prophets.
And that's what I just said.
Right.
Can I interject? Because it kind of sounds like, Brad, you're saying, like, you're saying love God and love your neighbor and everything else is going to fall in place.
Yeah.
And we agree with that. And you're saying they do love God and love their neighbor.
And they're piercing their ears.
But they will get judgment for doing something that doesn't matter, even though they're following this. So this here... You can. This is gonna look weird on camera. This stuff here, Brad, you're here. Jim, you're here. You both kind of agree, but this is the problem here,
right?
And it is the hedge makers and the Pharisees who still have some influence and power, and everyone just wants to be here. I don't care if you have 2 piercings. I don't care if you got those PacSun shorts. Do you love God? Do you love your neighbor? Do you treat people well? Yes. Okay, great. But then you got the people over there. Well, you're kind of a... And then we have to deal with that, and now they're reacting to that. And so, do we just give the middle finger to jerks in the church? Is that just the answer? Do we say...
and you would never want to say, like, we're openly saying defy what Gordon B. Hinckley just said because we think the argument over earrings is nonsensical.
Well, but, I mean, Brad could not be a student at BYU with that facial hair. What about facial hair?
Oh, bad person points.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
But BYU is a pharisaical institution run by all of these people who should have gotten over the 60s probably 10 years ago at the very latest.
But see, these are the things that are easy to measure. And
I
so
love
it's easy
BYU. I got my degree there.
Well, I always, when I was growing up, I grew up in California hating BYU, having never been there. And I refused to go to BYU, went to the University of Southern California, and finally, after I got married, got my MBA at BYU and loved it. Mm-hmm. Loved every second of it, although I was sort of removed from the kind of cultural life of it. I was already married. I wasn't even living in Provo. I would commute down from Salt Lake. So, but I loved the fact that you could be in an academic setting and a gospel topic could sort of come up and then go back down.
Yeah.
And you didn't, like when I was at USC, I always felt that like there was a part of my life that I really wasn't able to share with everybody else in an academic setting, and so I loved BYU for that. But all of the kinds of things that we talk about, both my daughters that have graduated, one's almost graduated from BYU, talk about all the pharisaical nonsense.
Oh yeah,
and I just think, how are we doing anybody any good by perpetuating this?
And I'm not saying we do that. I'm saying be obedient.
Well,
to
but
the
I mean,
actual
okay.
gospel.
So you go to General Conference and you look up and you see all of these men. What would be the scandal if one of the quorum of the 12 apostles stood up in conference and they were wearing a powder blue shirt? I mean, can you imagine the gasps that would ripple through the conference center?
So this is interesting, Brad, because we're getting kind of like a spirit of the law, letter of the law argument, which I think both have to a certain extent a validity. Let's just say, Brad Witbeck, Apostle 2029.
No,
once he shaves his beard.
Yeah, once he shaves his beard.
Freaking.
And Kwaku, I want to know what you think about this. Our stake dances were wildly more successful than the other stake right next to us because we didn't enforce a Sunday dress code. The other stake you had to wear a shirt and tie to. And they would interview you to go into the dance. So if you're bringing non-member friends, they had to get subjected to this, 3-minute. It was usually like a hi, how are you kind of thing. And they recognized it was a policy that the stake had that dated back to like the 70s. And they just kind of made it as like, hey, welcome to our chapel. What's your name? Oh, you're friends with so-and-so. That's how they came here. Okay, that's cool. I don't know if you know, but there's a dress code. And if you don't have a shirt, here's a shirt and tie. You know what I'm saying? They made it as cool as they could. But here's my question for you. Girl shows up to a dance. You're the gatekeeper at the dance. Stake president has told you, or you are the stake president, Brad, because you probably will be. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's easier.
You know what I'm saying?
Because then I can make the call. It's harder for the guy who's in the position where the stake president is over
okay,
him.
I get it.
Yeah.
Girl shows up. It's her first time. She's bubbly. She's there with friends. Who knows? Might be a potential investigator, whatever like it. She got 3 earrings on.
Mm-hmm.
Now all of a sudden you've got this thing that's on your mental plate.
Yeah.
Of, okay, well, do I be obedient and enforce this rule, which isn't a policy?
So,
or do I just say, welcome,
I would say welcome, because and this is the
Would you
second
though?
part of-
Because then you're going against the inspired.
And if my stake president wants to take away my temple recommend for letting a girl with 3 earrings in,
So
he
civil
doesn't have
disobedience.
charity. Yeah, and that is the second part of my answer. We need charity from people above to recognize we need to love our neighbor and love God more than we love our wicked traditions of our fathers.
So
right?
do you say that there is a moral justification for the equivalent of political civil disobedience against rules in the church that we think are stupid and pharisaical?
I think so. Like, let's think through the ramifications of that. I think the
Well,
issue
yeah,
that
because
you
what
just
are the
outlined,
ramifications?
yeah.
Like, okay, so I just don't want to wear garments anymore because I think it's stupid.
Yeah, like that's a bit different than
Okay, but how so? How so?
temple recommend questions. Let's go with that. That's
Well,
a
the
lot.
temple recommend questions have changed.
Yeah.
Very recently. It used to be, do you wear your garments day and night? And now it's, do you wear your garments as prescribed
Exactly.
in the temple?
Yeah.
And there's no place in the temple where they say day and night.
Mhm.
They say throughout your life. And the idea...
Wait. When did that change?
That's-
And are you telling me I have been wearing these every day and I don't have to?
No, I'm not
Are you
telling you
telling
that.
me this right now? Because if that is the truth, I am
There's a
gonna-
costume change going on in 3 minutes.
That change happened when President Nelson changed the temple recommend questions.
Yep.
He announced them from the pulpit. He read them. I'm not going to say that authorizes you not to wear your garments. What I
No,
do think
but
it
for
authorizes you is
some
it
of
puts
us-
the responsibility back on you.
Yes, I was about to
You
say
make the
it's-
decision.
And that, I think, is part of all of this, right?
Right.
You've got to recognize what you're responsible for and what you are not.
Right.
Because especially when you're a member of the ward and you are a random member of the ward and you're sitting there telling other people what they should do, that is not your place.
And I think that's where a lot of the reaction comes from. It's from the peanut gallery and
Yeah.
not always the church. But sometimes the peanut gallery will be someone in leadership, right? And I think I've been really directing my comments to those people whom I know who've had those experiences. And I mean, yeah, there is the, all right, you're fine, tough it up aspect. But then there's also the, okay, if it happens to one of my friends, weird. 2, okay, interesting. 3, yikes. 4, all right, 5, okay, this is probably a problem. And so, oh boy, this is going to be the most heretical thing I ever say. But I'm just going to say, and we'll see if we keep it in.
It's all right. We're just going. No, I'm just kidding.
There's an aspect to being a disciple where sometimes you will just disobey leadership. And I'm trying to be as honest as I can.
Do you have
when I
a
say
scriptural example?
that. Jesus Christ.
How so?
He just do not pick flowers on the Sabbath. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, but that would be assuming that the Sanhedrin were actually his authority, and he's not. They were the interpreter of the law that he gave, so he was the ultimate authority.
Right, but how did everybody else see it? The normal Jews saw it as this is disobeying the leaders. Through what he knew personally, which would be called, in a way, personal revelation.
That is the line that I think is good, is you obey the Spirit more than anything else.
Right, okay, no, perfect. But now this is the weeds, though, because you will get someone who's saying, I think it's okay if I have sex with my boyfriend or girlfriend because I think the Spirit's fine with it. And you go, well, no.
Hold on a second. Law of chastity.
That is naturally, though, a reaction to this very convoluted reality that sometimes when what is it? Some Harold B. Lee's daughter, I think, or granddaughter, or it was before the priesthood ban was being lifted, and there was a girl at BYU. She had a boyfriend who was black, and they were like, "You shouldn't date him," and she's like, "You can go after yourself. I'm going to do it anyway. You're disobeying us. I don't care. I'm going to do it." Ban gets lifted. They get married. Right? Okay. She disobeyed. She said, "I do not care. I think you're wrong."
Yeah.
And she was right to do that. But then you also get the, it's fine if I just have sex with my boyfriend. It's totally fine. I can. It's like, no, sister, that's a sin. That's a sin. So sometimes, we just have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with sometimes there are blurry lines and there's a swamp. And sometimes the swamp, you're gonna get a piece of fruit that, I don't know why this fruit's in a swamp. You're gonna get a piece of fruit that's sweet. Sometimes you're gonna get a pile of just gunk. And I think we kind of have to be okay with that. I think that's the world. I think the world is messy. And the biggest thing we can learn from church history, even with Joseph Smith, is that sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's convoluted, sometimes it's not quite that clear. But that's kind of the beauty of living. That's why it's fun. That's why this adventure on this planet, we get these cool stories. Sometimes I get to go, yeah, that was the weirdest steak conference ever had. You see what that guy said? Huh. All right. You know what? God is still good. And I'm okay with that. I like being a Latter-day Saint because I'm okay with the messiness. I'm okay with saying, Brigham, why would you say something that dumb about race? Also, Brigham, you badass, you led 70,000 people to a new country and built it. You know, I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? That's my, anyway, that's, I don't know if that's really an answer, but that's just
that's final thoughts, Jim, and then we got to wrap up. Well, you said that the brethren are going through this transformation, whether they know it or not. What can we do in your thoughts? And also where do you think where's this transition going to end? Because right now, as a millennial, I lament the spiritual loss of the testimonies of many of my brothers and sisters that I consider dear friends, and how the inactivity of some of these people, which I know is caked into the system because the ancient prophets foresaw that men's hearts will fail them and even the elect will be led astray and all this other stuff, but it hurts. And I'm sick of that hurt personally. And I get angry inside in a way that requires personal prayer to get over what is just, in my mind, the ineptitude of absolute low-hanging fruit in the church. That as Nephi wished there was a famine that would come across the land that would humble these people, sometimes I just wish, as he euphemistically said that leader of the church, Kwaku, was talking about, that until they are honorably discharged from service, there's times where I just wish could the PR department just honorably discharge, you know what I'm saying? And that's not out of an arrogance, because the arrogance of man is so debilitating. It's out of just seeing there's low-hanging fruit that I think we could fix. And I don't want to be the guy to do it. I wish I weren't. You know what I'm saying? But I can't help but see what I think some basic fixes would be that would save so many of these people that I don't think would have been lost had we done it.
Well, can you give you're asking me for my prescription. Can you give me the list of those things that need to be done?
Oh gosh, man, that would almost be another podcast. But if I had to summarize it to a simple, first, a robust, and I don't want to say an apology, because the people that demand apologies don't have the church's best interests in mind.
And they're never satisfied. But
I don't demand an apology, but I would like an apology for a number of different things that the church has done.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And the only reason why I say an apology is because I believe that we lead by example, and would not an example of hey, we did this and we recognize it was stupid, which is the first step of the 5 steps of repentance that we teach.
Right.
Would that not be leading by example? It's not going to be met with widespread inactivity in the church. In fact, to a certain extent, I think there's a lot of people that maybe on the fence might say okay, cool. And it doesn't have to be horrible. They don't have to be falling on their swords, for heaven's sakes. They don't have to be self-flagellating, saying, oh my gosh. Even just a simple, you know what? We're not sure where the exact origins of this are, but out of a cultural reaction to the sexual revolution of the 60s, we started prescribing, for fear of our youth's activity, this idea that, you have to get married in the temple the same day you get sealed in the temple. You have to get married civically the same day you get sealed in the temple. It was well-intentioned, but we recognized it didn't do well. And even just that would do 2 things for me. First, it would show, okay, these people are on the same page as me. And an apology, the best description of an apology I ever had, I've had to apologize at some point, probably to everybody in this room, some of them almost as recently as today. You know what I'm saying? But an apology means, the best description I've ever heard about an apology is that you care more about the relationship than you do about your pride. you know? And I'm not expecting the church to become this groveling organization, because you can't have the power of God, of Moses that will part the Red Sea and lead his people across. You know what I'm saying? While being this little beta who's like, oh, every little bad thing every other prophet did is so bad, you know? But there are some generals that I think we could cover in a non-self-flagellating way that would build massive bridges. Okay?
Yeah.
And then we can go into all the other stuff. But that's one that I think of. And then eschewing, like a robust fashion, asking the younger members of the church what they crave, what they want, and really doing a good job of catering to those faithful needs from a position of we asked and listened instead of a position of tradition.
Right.
Because I view that as the most scriptural approach. And I would feel better with, okay, we're not changing this policy, if Russell M. Nelson would tell me, I literally sat in the temple for 4 hours asking about this. And the revelation I received is that X, Y, or Z, and just said it. Because I have enough faith and sustain my leaders that much, just no more nebulous answers. And maybe this is an authenticity versus loyalty thing. Maybe by demanding that, my elders perceive me as being unloyal. But it's not. It's just a recognition of a craving that I think others have that, if fulfilled, would do really well.
Yeah. Because it's not that we're trying to say, like, hey, you have to be doing things this way.
Yeah.
It is more of this is kind of what a younger generation would appreciate.
Yes.
And if your goal is to help them understand you,
yeah.
This is something.
And
Yeah,
by the,
I see
if
where
we
you're
just
coming
get,
from.
I mean, like this could go on forever, and I don't want to get into minute details and make this sound like a complaint. But like, here's one for me, for example. We need to figure out freaking music in the church. We need to figure this crap out. It sucks. You go to any North American ward, and when we sing our hymns, unless you're in the Sikh, Tongan, and Polynesian wards in South LA, where everybody's singing like 5-part harmony, and it's the most beautiful thing you've heard since you went to a live Motab concert. You know what I'm saying? Unless you're lucky enough to have a Tongan friend you can go to church with,
Right.
It's a mother freaking dirge. It's a funeral march.
Right.
It sucks. And then you go to your buddy's evangelical church, and you're like, dang, okay, that's a little bit too much rock star, but I think somewhere in between Mormonism could be. You know what I'm saying? And like, I mean, so there's one. There's one right there.
Well, you know, I mean, I could go through a list too, and I think we could do that for hours and hours.
Yeah.
But the other question you asked is, where does this end? And the reason I still stay a member of the church, even as I look at all of the frustrations and all of the difficult things, is that this is my church and these are my people. And it ends with the Lord winning. It ends with victory. How long will it take to get there? I don't know. How messy will it be getting there? Very. You know, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to fall all over ourselves. But the confidence if I have a testimony of anything in this church, it's a testimony that the Lord's hand is in this church and that long term we get there. But we get there sometimes when we wander 40 years in the wilderness. We don't get there necessarily in a straight line. And, you know, missionary efforts we've always kind of acted like it's been this exponential growth and that all of a sudden this is the first time that it's dipped. After the manifesto, missionary efforts trickled to almost nothing. And it wasn't until after World War II and David O. McKay, when he started to create a sort of worldwide church, and we weren't asking everybody to come to the Salt Lake Valley, that we suddenly discovered this sort of nuclear family thing as being the central mission of the church. And everybody sort of embraced that. And now we're trying to figure out, well, what's our message in the 21st century? And we're stumbling and we're figuring it out. But the confidence I have is that we are going to get there. That's the difference between a true church and a true and living church, is that a living church is going to make mistakes, but we're going to grow and we're going to get there. But I think all of the suggestions that have been offered in this podcast are great ways to get there.
Okay, cool. Well, we got to stop now because we've already gone 10 minutes over, but I like everything I heard today. If you haven't liked, shared, subscribed, or anything, do it now. There's more on the way. This is Midnight Mormons.